We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Run.
The right to govern. What does it mean to have a government described by Webster and Lincoln as having been derived of the people, by the people, and for the people? Well, explicitly it means that the power to govern the people is, and should be, derived from the consent of the governed, as our founders stated in the Declaration of Independence. It therefore follows that the only power that such a government can possess is power originally possessed by the people and voluntarily transferred to the government within the restrictions contained in the contract that establishes that government. For the American people over the last couple of centuries, this document, this contract, has been the Constitution of the United States. As the 44th President, Barack Obama, correctly pointed out in a 2001 interview, the Constitution is a document of negative powers. Though he meant that as a criticism, it was actually the intent of the founders to create such a constitution in order to protect the most vulnerable minority, the individual. In other words, the Constitution tells you what the government cannot do to its individual citizens rather than instructing it on what to do for them. The government is limited to specific actions and not allowed to do anything else with the powers not assigned to it, as those powers remain with the people or the state in which the people freely choose to reside. This is the foundation of the greatest experiment in human governments, individualism. So why is the Constitution a document of negative powers? Well, strictly because the government cannot possess powers that the individuals creating it do not themselves possess. Do I have the right to take your money from you and arbitrarily give it to someone else? Do I have the right to prevent you from planting cabbage in your garden, or prevent you from consuming raw milk, or freely selling that raw milk to another citizen? Well, then how can I transfer that power that I don't have to another individual? Power not possessed individually is also not possessed collectively. The foundation for America is individualism, not collectivism in any of its myriad forms, from monarchies to oligarchies, from National Socialism to global communism, or from any variation of these tyrannical forms of government, be they soft or hard. If individualism, then, is the foundational construct, why do we form governments? Well, there are several valid reasons for which individuals may choose to work cooperatively with each other. The most compelling reason among these is, of course, defense of person and property. It is a power owned by the individual and thus can be individually granted to the various levels of government in order to defend the persons and property of all members of the community, state, or nation in turn. It is the right of the individual to protect himself from the robber, so he therefore has the ability to apportion some of that power to the city. It is the right of the individual to protect himself from invasion or coercion by other more powerful individuals or groups, so he therefore has the ability to apportion some of that power to the state. By granting to the state or to the city to act on his behalf in defense of his life and property, though, he in no way lessens or limits his own ability to defend his own life and property. I do not have the right to arbitrarily demand a portion of your wealth, your property, or your productivity to use as I deem beneficial for myself, the community, or even the state. I do have the right to use any of my wealth, property, or productivity to accomplish any task I deem beneficial to the community or state, but only in my free will and as long as it is entirely voluntary on my part. There is a word for taking someone else's wealth, property, or productivity without their consent to use at the discretion of someone else. We call that slavery. Any attempt, however noble or beneficial is made to appear, to strip unwillingly a person's wealth or property or productivity from them is an attack on that individual's freedoms, rights, and therefore violates their sovereign agency. But what if the purpose for confiscating that wealth is for a very good cause? Well, again, it does not matter how beneficial or charitable the cause itself may be. Robbing or enslaving someone to accomplish a good deed is still not defensible. Will this approach not lead to greater suffering and harm in the world then, you may ask? No, because people will then have the ability to choose to willingly give of their wealth, property, or productivity to help others. Taxation, or robbery, has no place in the society of free people. For those powers such as defense, where the people have granted some portion of that power to the city or state, they must willingly provide the means for such defense of their own free will. If it is not enough to defend them, then they bear the result of that lack of foresight as well. This means that the very production and retention of weapons and other items of a defensive nature resides with the individual as well. The community can choose to possess certain defensive armaments as a shared community resource, but the cost and care must be supported voluntarily by the individual members of the community. If an individual either creates or buys weapons for a personal or family defense, it is as much their own property as any other item and cannot be restricted or confiscated by the community or by the state. An individual does not possess the right to educate another family's children, the right to determine what another individual should be allowed to read or view, the right to determine who another marries, the right to determine who works for someone else, the right to prohibit or promote the expression of religion of another, the right to censor the speech or expression of another, the right to force another to associate with people they do not want to associate with, and thus neither can any state possess these types of powers. Since neither the state nor the individual possess such rights, they also do not have the right to confiscate anyone's wealth, property, or productivity to accomplish any of these ends. Yes, this even applies to healthcare. You do not have the right to take from my wealth, property, or productivity the means to provide yourself with healthcare. If I'm a doctor, I am not compelled to work for you at your whim, for free, or even at a cost arbitrarily set by someone else. I have the right to choose who I treat or do not treat, and I have the right to charge what I consider a fair wage or barter for my services to you. Otherwise, if another person has the right to determine when I work, what I work on, who I work for, and what I earn for my effort, I'm nothing more than a slave. Let me repeat, that is slavery. Of course, that is the preferred societal arrangement of the Democrat Party since its inception, and still advocated in more modern soft form through societal obligation and entitlements. You can readily identify these quiet attempts at slavery or power grabs as they call for minimum standards or minimum wage or some other version of authority stealing in the name of fairness or equality. Again, if I do not possess the power, the state cannot wield that power in my name, even if it is for my supposed benefit. The government does not possess powers not possessed by the individual, nor does the existence of a government presuppose any obligation on the part of the individuals. For example, I am not responsible for providing an education for another person outside of my family. Therefore, leaving familial responsibilities aside, I cannot be robbed to provide a degree in feminine empowerment studies for an aggrieved social justice warrior, nor must I bear the cost of a degree in molecular science for a genius-level student. If I do not have an individual obligation to provide for another's education, the state cannot carry or even impose such an obligation on me either. No matter how beneficial to society the education of that individual may be, an obligation cannot exist collectively where one does not exist individually. If an individual decides on a voluntary basis to cooperate with his neighbors in providing a shared educational experience for the benefit of the community, that is another matter entirely, as it does not violate an individual right. Additionally, individualism flows both ways. For example, no individual can take action either corporately or in concert with other individuals, whether in business or government, regardless of being elected, appointed, or hired, and possess any rights or protections not possessed by an individual. Thus, the concept of a corporate entity or a government entity existing separate from the officers of that company or members of that political body is a fallacy. They make decisions and take actions as individuals and therefore bear individual, i.e. personal, responsibility and restrictions as well. If the actions of a corporation or government entity cause harm to another individual, all members involved with that act within that corporation or government entity bear a personal responsibility for that harm. Again, the principle of individualism demands that if an individual doing a harmful action were responsible, then a group of individuals committing the same act would also be individually responsible. We'll get more into the myths of society in our next video, but to recap, we covered 3 points today. If legitimate government derives its power from the consent of the governed, then the government cannot possess powers that the individual does not possess. Or to restate the converse, the individual cannot grant to the government any power that the individual himself does not possess. Secondly, if your government has powers that an individual does not possess and therefore could not transfer, then you do not have a legitimate government. You have some degree of tyranny where rulers have taken for themselves unjust powers over the lives of individuals and subjugated them into some form of slavery, no matter how cozy or comfortable such a state may be for some. And the last point is that acting corporately or collectively does not remove individual responsibility for the actions of those individuals involved. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you better understand the right to govern as defined by individualism. Please subscribe and share. Thanks again.